Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we're taking you into a world that honestly feels ripped from the pages of a spy thriller. We're talking cyber espionage, disinformation, and a case that's about as murky as they come.
Yeah, this one is really fascinating. I think what really grabs you about this case is that it just forces you to think about, well, how do we actually know what's real anymore in the digital age? And that's really what we're going to be exploring using some declassified documents as our guide. So, how do these revelations connect to the problems and challenges we face today? That's the big question here.
And the story revolves around the alleged hack of a company called CEIEC, which stands for China National Electronics Import and Export Corporation. And if that sounds like a mouthful, just know that they're a major player when it comes to electronics and infrastructure on a global scale. But here's where it gets even more interesting, right? The source of this leaked info, well, they're an individual link to Russian intelligence. And to make things even more complicated, this source has a bit of a reputation for, shall we say, blending the real with the fabricated.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you're handed a puzzle, but some of the pieces are intentionally designed to mislead you. You know what I mean? So what we're doing today is essentially a deep dive, a quest to figure out what's genuine intelligence and what's carefully crafted disinformation.
Exactly. And to even begin to unravel this, well, we're going to need to put on our historian hats, examine the technical side of things, and of course, try to figure out the motives of everyone involved. It's a real puzzle.
Yeah, and I think maybe even more importantly, we should explore what this entire case says about how cyber warfare is changing, how trust in the digital world is eroding, and just how we're supposed to navigate a world where information itself is being used as a weapon. It's a lot to unpack.
So let's start with the basics, what we know about the CEIEC hack itself. Now, admittedly, details are pretty scarce at this point. Initial reports kind of point to maybe a breach that used some traditional hacking methods, things like phishing or exploiting weaknesses in their systems.
Right.
But given what we know about the source and their history, well, we got to be really cautious.
Yeah, you can't just take this information as gospel. It's all about healthy skepticism in this game. Imagine just for a second a scenario where someone leaks a fabricated document. And this document says that CEIEC, knowingly sold faulty equipment to a certain country. Now, let's mix that with some real data about CEIEC's international contracts. See where I'm going with this?
It's a classic case of what they call hybrid disinformation, right? Blend some truth in with fabrication to cook up a narrative that people will actually believe and, of course, cause some serious damage.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so tricky. Even if, and that's a big if, some of the leaked data is legit, the fact that there might be forgeries in there, well, it casts a shadow of doubt on everything. It's like finding a beautiful pearl in a pile of fakes. You're never really sure if it's the real deal or just a really good imitation.
So how do we even start untangling this mess of truth and lies? I mean, from a cybersecurity expert's perspective, how do you approach a case where the evidence itself might be compromised? It's got to be tricky.
Oh, it's incredibly meticulous work. They're looking at the metadata of the released files, searching for any inconsistencies or anything that just seems off, stuff that screams manipulation. Then they'll compare these technical details to what they already know about the tactics and tools used by different cyber actors out there.
So it's almost like, yeah, it might be reaching here, but it's almost like criminal profiling, but for hackers. You're trying to build a profile of the attacker based on their digital fingerprints, even if those fingerprints might be intentionally misleading.
You got it. They're analyzing malware samples, coding styles, even the infrastructure used to launch the attack. It's all part of the puzzle. But attributing these cyber attacks, especially when you're talking about state actors, oh man, it's tough. There's always going to be some level of uncertainty.
Which brings us to, you guessed it, the Russian connection. Now, I got to imagine that for a lot of our listeners, this idea of state-sponsored hacking probably sounds like something out of a movie, right? Can you give us some historical context here? Help us understand how we got to this point.
Sure. So state-sponsored hacking, well, it's become a major part of how countries interact with each other these days. It's not just about stealing secrets anymore. Think back to Operation Aurora in 2009, where Google and a bunch of other big companies were targeted. It was a huge wake-up call, showed everyone that even the most advanced tech giants out there were vulnerable.
And it's gone way beyond just stealing secrets, hasn't it? These attacks that can influence elections, disrupt critical infrastructure. I mean, the list goes on. The stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. And when we talk about Russia specifically, they've got a long and well-documented history of cyber operations and disinformation campaigns. And Honestly, they've become masters at using these tools to get what they want on the geopolitical stage.
So in this CEIEC, what are we thinking about in terms of Russia's motives? Are they just trying to get some intel on China? Maybe sow some discord between China and other countries? Or is there something else going on here, something we haven't even considered?
It's really hard to say for sure at this point, but one possibility, one that's worth thinking about, is that Russia is trying to take advantage of already existing tensions between China and other countries. By releasing this information, real or not, they could be trying to fuel distrust and suspicion, make things even more complicated for China on the global stage.
So it's a classic divide and conquer strategy,
Mhm.
but playing out in the digital world.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Another possibility is that Russia is sending a message not just to China, but to everyone. They're showing off their cyber capabilities, their willingness to use them in unconventional ways.
It's almost like they're saying, hey, we can get into any network, anywhere, and manipulate information to get what we want. And that's a pretty chilling thought, regardless of whether this particular incident turns out to be real or just another elaborate fabrication.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why we need to dig deeper into this. We need to examine the technical details, understand what the experts are saying, and really grasp the potential impact of this alleged hack.
Because, you know, even if we can't definitively answer the question of what actually happened, this whole situation is a wake-up call. It shows us just how complex and dangerous the world of cyber warfare and disinformation has become. So let's put on our detective hats, fire up our digital magnifying glasses, and see what other clues we can uncover.
If we shift gears a bit and start thinking about the potential fallout from this alleged hack, assuming, of course, that at least some of this information is the real deal, well, CEIEC, they're involved in these critical infrastructure projects all over the world. So any kind of security breach, it could have some pretty serious consequences, globally speaking.
Yeah, it's not just about some stolen data, right? It's
Yeah.
about the potential for someone to disrupt essential services, supply chains, even national security. I mean, the ripple effects could be huge.
Exactly. So if this breach really happened, it exposes some vulnerabilities within a major Chinese state-owned enterprise, no less. And that raises some big questions about China's cybersecurity as a whole. Are they doing enough to protect their critical infrastructure from these kinds of attacks? What kind of weaknesses were exploited? These are the questions we need to be asking.
And that brings us to another layer of this story that we need to peel back,
Mhm.
the technical nitty-gritty. But I imagine even trying to analyze the methods they used in this attack is
Oh,
tricky, right? Especially given the possibility that some of this information might be intentionally fabricated.
Oh, absolutely. It's a nightmare scenario for investigators. It's like trying to defuse a bomb, but you're not even sure if all the wires are real, you
Yeah.
know? When they look into a cyber attack, they're searching for what we call digital fingerprints. These are things like malware samples, specific coding styles, or even the infrastructure used to launch the attack. But if some of the data is fake, well, those fingerprints could be nothing more than red herrings, intentionally planted to throw everyone off the scent.
So how on earth do experts even begin to separate the truth from the lies in such a chaotic environment? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is on fire and someone keeps throwing more needles at you.
It's a painstaking process, that's for sure. They're scrutinizing the metadata of the released files, looking for inconsistencies or anything that seems out of place, anything that could point to manipulation. And then they'll compare these technical details to what they already know about different cyber actors and the tactics they use. It's almost like building a criminal profile, but for hackers.
So they're essentially trying to build a profile of the attacker, even though that attacker might be deliberately trying to disguise their tracks. That's got to be frustrating.
Oh, incredibly frustrating. And it's important to remember that even with the most advanced forensic analysis, there are no guarantees. Attributing cyber attacks, especially those carried out by state actors, is incredibly difficult. There's always going to be an element of doubt, you know?
Yeah, it's like a high-stakes game of chess, but the players are hidden behind these layers of digital smoke and mirrors. Never quite sure who's making the moves or what their end game is.
That's a perfect analogy. And in this particular match, there's a wild card on the board that makes things even more complicated. The source of the information itself. Knowing their history, their tendency to release forged documents, we can't just take their word for it. We have to approach their claims with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. Because even if some of the data is real, the fact that there might be fabricated information mixed in with it, well, it casts doubt on the entire set. It's like finding a genuine pearl in a pile of fakes. You can never be entirely sure if it's truly valuable or just another clever imitation.
Exactly. And that's why the opinions of cybersecurity experts are so divided in this case. Some of them, they believe that even if we only have partial real data, it could still be significant. It could reveal vulnerabilities in CEIEC systems, or maybe even shed light on new attack methods that we haven't seen before. Others, though, they argue that because there are forgeries mixed in, we can't draw any meaningful conclusions. It just muddies the waters too much.
So we're stuck in this gray area, right? We can't completely dismiss the information, but we also can't take it at face value. It's a classic intelligence dilemma. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are designed to mislead you.
It really is. And it just highlights the challenges we face in a world where information itself has become a weapon. It's not just about physical force anymore, it's about manipulating perceptions, sowing discord, and eroding trust.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a minute and focus on Russia's potential motives in all of this. We've already talked about the possibility of them trying to exploit tensions between China and other countries, but what are some other possibilities? What could they be hoping to gain from this?
One scenario that we should consider is that maybe, just maybe, Russia's goal is to specifically damage CEIC's reputation. Think about it. If they release information, real or fake, that suggests that CEIC's systems are vulnerable or that they're involved in some shady business practices. That could really undermine trust in the company.
Yeah, that could have a huge impact on CEIC's international business dealings, especially in a world where cybersecurity is so important. I mean, no government or corporation wants to work with a company that's seen as a security risk.
Absolutely. Governments and corporations, they might hesitate to work with a company that's perceived as having weak security or one that engages in unethical practices. That kind of loss of trust, it could be a major setback for CEIC and, by extension, for China's economic and technological ambitions.
So this goes beyond just geopolitical maneuvering then. It's about economic warfare as well, using information as a weapon to damage a competitor's reputation and potentially cripple their business.
Exactly. In the digital age, information is a weapon that can be used on multiple fronts. It's not just about stealing secrets or disrupting infrastructure anymore. It's about shaping narratives, manipulating perceptions, and ultimately influencing the balance of power.
This whole situation, it feels like a wake-up call about the growing threat of disinformation and the erosion of trust in the digital world. It's getting harder and harder to know what's real and what's not, and that has huge implications for all of us.
It's a wake-up call on multiple levels. First, it shows just how sophisticated and widespread these cyber attacks have become. No one is immune, not even major state-owned enterprises like CEIEC. Second, it highlights the growing danger of disinformation, the deliberate spread of false or misleading information to manipulate people and achieve certain goals. We're living in an information ecosystem where truth is under constant attack, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction. And finally, this case reminds us that the geopolitical landscape is shifting, and cyber warfare is becoming a central part of that shift. We need to be prepared for a world where information itself is a weapon, and where the battle lines are drawn in cyberspace.
So with all of that in mind, what can we do about it? How do we navigate this increasingly complex and frankly treacherous digital landscape? It feels like we're constantly bombarded with information, and it's hard to know what to trust.
There are a few things we can do, both individually and collectively. On an individual level, we need to develop our critical thinking skills. We need to constantly question our assumptions, be discerning consumers of information, and not just accept everything we see online at face value.
So it's about becoming digital detectives in a way, always looking for clues that might reveal manipulation or deception. It's about recognizing that not everything is as it seems in the digital world.
Exactly. Don't just passively consume information, actively engage with it. Look for corroboration from multiple sources. Think about the motives of the people who are sharing the information, and be wary of anything that feels overly sensational or emotionally charged. Often, that kind of content is designed to trigger an immediate reaction rather than thoughtful analysis.
It's like we need to develop this digital immune system to protect ourselves from the onslaught of misinformation that's constantly being thrown our way. We need to be able to filter out the noise and identify the real threats.
That's a great analogy. And just like our physical immune systems, our digital immune systems need to be constantly learning and adapting to new threats. As the methods of disinformation evolve, so too must our ability to recognize and counter them.
So building that digital immune system, that's one crucial takeaway. What else should people be thinking about as they navigate this digital world? What other practical steps can they take to protect themselves?
Well, this case also highlights how important strong cybersecurity measures are. And I'm not just talking about governments and corporations here. Individuals need to step up their game as well. Remember, it's not just about protecting national secrets or corporate data anymore. It's about safeguarding our own digital lives. Our personal information, our financial details, our online identities, all of these are increasingly vulnerable in the digital age.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, isn't it? Like, where do we even begin to protect ourselves? It feels like a losing battle sometimes.
It doesn't have to be a losing battle. It starts with individual responsibility. We need to be proactive about cybersecurity in our daily life. Use strong, unique passwords for every account. Be wary of phishing scams and suspicious links. Keep our software and devices up to date with the latest security patches. These are the digital equivalents of locking our doors and windows.
Yeah, it's about developing those basic digital hygiene habits. It's not glamorous, but it's essential if we want to stay safe online. It's about making cybersecurity a part of our daily routines.
Exactly. And just as we wouldn't leave our homes unlocked or share our personal details with strangers on the street, we need to be equally cautious in the digital realm. It's about applying those same common sense principles to our online lives.
But individual responsibility is only part of the equation, right? We also need corporations and governments to step up and create a safer digital environment for everyone. It can't just be on individuals to protect themselves.
Absolutely. Organizations, they need to make cybersecurity a top priority. Invest in robust infrastructure. Train their employees on best practices. Have clear protocols in place for responding to incidents. It's about creating a culture of security.
And governments, they have a role to play as well, right?
Absolutely. Governments need to set standards, promote best practices, and, hold malicious actors accountable for their actions. It's about creating a framework that encourages responsible behavior in cyberspace and deters malicious activity.
So it's a shared responsibility. It's about individuals, corporations, and governments working together to create a more secure and trustworthy digital world.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility.
Exactly. And speaking of the bigger picture, this case also raises important questions about international cooperation. If countries are constantly engaging in these kinds of cyber operations against each other, isn't that a recipe for disaster? I mean, where does it end? We've spent this whole episode really picking apart this alleged CEIC hack. And it's a case that just leaves you with this uneasy feeling. It's not just about some technical vulnerabilities. It's about the very foundation of how we as a society consume information and decide what to believe in this digital age. It's a real mess.
Yeah, and it's a case that really highlights these larger trends that are shaping our world, right? We're talking about the growing sophistication of cyber attacks, how information is being used as a weapon, and just this general erosion of trust in a digital landscape where truth is, well, it's getting harder and harder to find.
You hit the nail on the head. This case, it's like a microcosm of these big, complex forces that are at play. So, with all that in mind, what are the key takeaways here? What does all this mean for everyday people, not just governments and corporations?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's easy to get lost in the weeds with all the technical details and geopolitical maneuvering. But at the end of the day, what does this mean for us, the average person, trying to navigate this increasingly complicated digital world?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is that this case goes way beyond CEIEC or even China. It's about this broader trend of declining trust in institutions, in the information we see online, in the systems that we rely on. We're constantly bombarded with data, news, opinions, but how do we filter through all the noise and figure out what's actually real? What hasn't been manipulated or spun to fit someone else's agenda? That's the challenge.
Right. It's like that old saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth can even get its boots on.
Yeah.
But in today's world with social media and the internet, lies can spread at lightning speed. They go viral before anyone even has a chance to fact check them. It's a real problem.
Exactly. And that's precisely why it's more important than ever to sharpen those critical thinking skills. We need to be skeptical, question our assumptions, and really think critically about the information we come across. We can't just blindly accept everything we read or see online.
We have to be like detectives, always on the lookout for clues that might reveal some kind of manipulation or bias. It's about recognizing that things aren't always what they seem in the digital world.
I like that, digital detectives. We need to actively engage with the information we consume. Look for corroboration from multiple sources. Think about the motivations of the people sharing the information. And be wary of anything that feels overly sensational or designed to trigger a strong emotional reaction. Oftentimes, that kind of content is designed to bypass our critical thinking and make us react without really thinking things through.
It's like we need to develop this digital immune system, right? A
Yeah.
way to filter out all the harmful stuff and protect ourselves from this constant barrage of misinformation.
That's a great way to put it. And just like our physical immune systems, our digital immune systems need to be constantly learning and adapting to new threats. As the methods of disinformation evolve, so too must our ability to recognize and counter them.
So building that digital immune system, that's one big takeaway from all this. What else should our listeners be thinking about as they navigate this increasingly complex and often overwhelming digital world?
Well, this case also underscores the importance of robust cybersecurity, and not just for governments and big companies. This is something that affects individuals as well. It's not just about protecting national secrets or corporate data anymore. It's about safeguarding our own digital lives, our personal information, our financial details, our online identities. All of these things are increasingly vulnerable in the digital age.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of that. Like, where do we even begin? It feels like an uphill battle sometimes.
It doesn't have to be. It starts with individual responsibility, being proactive about cybersecurity in our daily lives. Strong passwords, being wary of phishing scams, keeping our software up to date, all of these things, they're the digital equivalent of locking our doors and windows.
It's about developing good digital hygiene habits. It's not glamorous or exciting, but it's essential. It's about integrating basic cybersecurity practices into our daily routines, just like brushing our teeth or washing our hands.
Exactly. Just as we wouldn't leave our physical homes unlocked or share our personal details with strangers on the street, we need to exercise the same level of caution in the digital realm. It's about translating those common sense principles into our online lives.
Right. But it can't just be on individuals to protect themselves, can it? We also need corporations and governments to create a safer digital environment for everyone.
Absolutely. Organizations, they have a responsibility to prioritize cybersecurity. Invest in strong infrastructure, train their employees, have clear plans in place to respond to incidents. It's about creating a culture of security where everyone understands the importance of protecting sensitive information and systems.
And governments, they have a role to play as well,
Right.
setting standards, promoting best practices, holding malicious actors accountable.
Exactly. Governments need to establish clear rules of the road for cyberspace, just like we have in the physical world. They need to define what constitutes acceptable behavior and create mechanisms to deter malicious activity and hold those who violate those rules accountable for their actions. It's about creating a framework that promotes stability and security in the digital realm.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, right? Individuals, corporations, and governments all working together to create a more secure and trustworthy digital world. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility.
Exactly. And this brings us to maybe the most challenging aspect of all of this: international cooperation. As we've seen with this CEIEC case, cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, they can have global consequences. They can escalate existing tensions, undermine trust between nations, and even contribute to real-world conflict.
It feels like we're teetering on the edge of a new kind of conflict, one where the battles are fought in cyberspace. And the scary part is that the rules of engagement are still being written.
In a lot of ways, that conflict is already happening. But it's not a traditional war with clear-cut sides and objectives. It's messy, constantly evolving, and the lines are blurred.
So how do we prevent this from spiraling out of control? How do we establish order in this digital Wild West?
That's the million-dollar question. There are no easy answers. But a crucial step is establishing clear international norms and standards for behavior in cyberspace. We need to define what's acceptable and what's not, create mechanisms for holding violators accountable, and build a framework for cooperation and collaboration in the digital realm.
It's like trying to establish the rule of law in the Wild West, right? Creating a system of rules and consequences to bring order to a chaotic and often lawless environment.
Precisely. And just as in the physical world, enforcing those rules will require cooperation and collaboration between nations. It will also require a willingness to impose consequences on those who violate those norms, whether through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, or in extreme cases, maybe even retaliatory cyber operations.
So it's a delicate balancing act. trying to deter aggression without triggering an escalation that could lead to a full-blown cyber war.
It's a complex challenge that will require careful diplomacy, strategic thinking, and a commitment from the global community to work together to build a more stable and secure digital world. There's no easy solution, but it's a challenge we need to address if we want to avoid some potentially catastrophic consequences.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We explored the technical details of the CEIEC hack, the motives, the implications, the challenges of cybersecurity, disinformation, and international cooperation in the digital age. It's been a pretty sobering conversation, but also, I think, an incredibly important one. We've raised some really critical questions about the world we're living in and the challenges we face in this digital age.
I agree. If there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this, it's that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of the digital landscape. By staying informed, thinking critically, and advocating for a more secure and trustworthy internet, we can help build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
That's a great message to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, in the digital age, knowledge is power, and critical thinking is our strongest defense. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and until next time, keep exploring the depths of the issues that matter most.